glad Tommy got your ass sitting in the house. The could have killed you, D. And I ain't ready for that, bro.
I'm not playing, Marshall.
Look at you. You can't either. We brothers. Can't do that.
How could you kill someone you love?
Some say you're not a real killer till you do.
Now, today we're going to be going through DMAC killing Marshall, how you're not a real killer till you kill someone you love, which is something that was mentioned way back in Power during a conversation between Tariq and Kanan. Fast forward to Force 309, it's exactly what we saw between DMAC and Marshall. Two characters that had known each other since they were 6, they weren't just boys, they were brothers. And for those who didn't notice at the time, in the background on the fridge were pictures of DMAC and Marshall, which were soon covered in blood. They were brothers, and it was a heartbreaking moment for DMAC in more ways than one, who was still suffering so much emotionally from JP's death. And I do think that played a huge part in DMAC pulling the trigger. But one of the questions that we are going to be asking a bit later on, was DMAC right in pulling the trigger? Did Marshall deserve that bullet for picking Janard over his brother? He picked a junkie over someone that he'd known since he was 6, that he said was his brother. Or did DMAC take it too far? That's the topic of discussion in today's breakdown, as we unpack DMAC's latest kill, as well as what's next for DMAC, the revenge on Janard, his relationship with Tommy, and potentially even Tariq, in the final episode of Power Book 4 Force, and potentially even beyond. Now, for those who may have forgotten, because it has been a very long time since Season 1, they were introduced as young kids who were under Janard when Tommy first came to Chicago. They were very ambitious in terms of wanting to get down with CBI and also in the game, and that's when both of them made a move with Marshall's cousin. But what we saw play out in Episode 9 in Season 3, in Marshall picking CBI over DMAC, that wasn't actually the first time that's happened. And I do think it's important we do understand that and remember that. We saw Marshall picking CBI when he went to the club in Season 1 without telling DMAC. He wanted to get in with the crew and make this deal with his cousin, get in with CBI without DMAC. He left out someone who was supposed to be his brother, someone who he'd known since he was 6, for basically these guys. But that's not all. He did also pull a gun on DMAC in Season 1 as well. So when he pulled his gun in Episode 9, that wasn't his first time. Now, in my opinion, what played out in Season 1, Marshall should have learned his lesson, because Janard did also cut him out with a deal with his cousin and left Marshall out, which is when we saw Marshall apologizing to DMAC. And of course, they did put it behind them because they're boys, they're brothers. We've seen mistakes being made with previous brotherhoods in Power, and they put it behind them. We saw Marshall looking after DMAC when he needed to be. He gave him a place to crash. He tried to tell him maybe not being in CBI isn't a bad thing after all, because look how much trouble it caused him before. It almost got himself killed, and Marshall wasn't ready for his brother to go. Earlier on in Season 3, in Episode 3, he was shaking his head when it came to agreeing to make a move on the 9/7s, because he knew it was a suicide mission. He was trying to tell DMAC, don't go for it, just tell Janard no, but at the same time, he did stick by him in Episodes 2 and 3, when they made a move on the gambling spot on the Chinese, and also when they made a move on the 9/7s. Marshall did have his back, regardless of knowing that this was a very dangerous mission that could have turned very ugly. He had his brother's back. But Tommy did also warn him back in Episode 2 as well. He used to have a brother just like him, and sometimes that doesn't end too well for them, which was a little foreshadow for it not ending too well for Marshall.
This is what?
That's my brother.
Is you CBI?
Yeah, I'm CBI.
All right then. That's the answer. Get it done.
Now, it does have to be said, Marshall didn't want to kill DMAC, and you could tell the moment Janard was trying to convince him to kill his brother, Marshall was very hesitant. He told Janard he's picked CBI, but at the same time, he can't do that to DMAC, which Janard wasn't having. He said, you're either with CBI or you're not, get the job done. Now, I'm not sure how Marshall didn't remember, but this was the same man who tried to set DMAC up to die with the 9/7s move. That was back in Episode 3, which almost got Marshall killed as well. Marshall's response was, they tried to kill DMAC, not him. But he was definitely looking at it completely wrong. Janard didn't give a shit about Marshall either. If Marshall ended up being collateral damage while DMAC got taken out by the 9/7s, if this ended in the death of all these young kids, including Marshall, you know what Janard would have done? He probably would have just shrugged his shoulders. Just like when he said JP was collateral damage. When Raheem told him about Marshall's death later on in Episode 9, he kind of just shrugged his shoulders, and he was more mad about him not being able to get the job done rather than them losing Marshall. Janard really didn't give a shit about Marshall, and that's what he failed to realize. He didn't have this bond with CBI or Janard like he had with DMAC, and that's a fact. DMAC was his brother, and Janard was just someone who frankly didn't give a shit about Marshall. He just used him like another pawn. Now, with that being said, this is where we're going to come to the question, should Marshall have stood by DMAC? because in this moment, even though Marshall was telling D-Mac to get out of town, he needs to leave, at the same time, he was still picking Janard over D-Mac because he wasn't giving the information of Janard's location to his boy. That was after Janard had just killed JP. He was still picking CBI over his brother, when in reality, in my opinion, there should have been no questions, no debate. What Marshall should have done here was, he should have told D-Mac, look, Janard wants you dead, he's asked me to kill you, but this is the move. This is how we're going to play it. They're going to be at the barbershop basement at this time. This is the move. Let's roll and put an end to Janard. I've definitely got your back. Because I can guarantee if it was the other way around and say, for example, Janard had killed Marshall's mom instead, would D-Mac have slid for Marshall and backed his brother, or would he have picked CBI? I personally think he would have definitely have backed Marshall. D-Mac even said it in this conversation in episode 9. They'd known each other since they were 6. But all of a sudden, Marshall said that he was done protecting him and basically chose CBI. Now, even prior to episode 9, when we broke down the exclusive clips of D-Mac and Marshall and Tommy and Diamond, we mentioned there was going to be an overriding theme of brotherhood in episode 9, and that's exactly what we saw, which is also a theme across the world of power, and one brotherhood that we can always refer back to is Tommy and Ghost. In moments you can definitely argue Ghost was selfish and chose himself a lot of the times, but there was also a constant theme, especially when it came to enemies or people that would try and kill their brother or even put one of them in prison.
You didn't think I was gonna let Tommy rot in prison, did you?
I played right into your hand.
And I gave you Lobos for your troubles. But you can't have Tommy.
That was Ghost telling Angela, the love of his life, that he gave Felipe Lobos for her troubles, but she couldn't have Tommy. Why? Because their brotherhood goes deeper than what we even saw on Power. Something we no doubt will see more of in Power Origins, but just also have a look at what happened to Holly when she tried to use the Jamaicans to kill Ghost. Even with Milan. Even though Tommy was getting in good with Milan in the Serbian network, even though him and Ghost were going through a really troubled time at that moment, he stuck by Ghost and they did what needed to be done. Same thing with Felipe Lobos.
Una condición. Tommy. Venga. He's dead weight.
Their relationship was no doubt tested over and over again in Power by countless of people, and it was very complex to say the least, with different factors and players involved, but you definitely get the gist. These were two brothers for majority of the time that always picked each other. Now bringing it back to Force 309, when Marshall pulled his gun on D-Mac for the second time, could D-Mac let that slide? Was D-Mac going to let Marshall pick Janard over their brotherhood? I do think what we need to remember and what is key, and what was key at this moment in time in terms of the broader storyline, is D-Mac's mental state. We have to remember that this was someone who just lost his father. The guy that Marshall was refusing to give up was the guy who killed D-Mac's pops. And as I mentioned before, you flip the roles, you have the role reversal. I do think D-Mac slides for Marshall. But because D-Mac was full of raw emotion, anger, pain, hurt, the fact that Marshall decided to pick CBI over their brotherhood, the fact that he decided to pick Janard over someone that he knew since he was 6, along with the fact that this was the second time Marshall pulled a gun on D-Mac, and also not giving up Janard, who was the one who killed JP, honestly I don't think D-Mac could let that slide. In my opinion, Marshall was definitely wrong for not picking D-Mac over Janard. He definitely should have maybe said, this is where we can find Janard, I've got your back. Marshall should have definitely backed his brother. For what Janard did to JP, he had to pick D-Mac. For what he did with the 9/7s, he had to pick D-Mac. And well and truly, you can't be half in and half out with CBI and D-Mac. Tommy and D-Mac were at war with Janard and CBI, and if you're in with the CBI, that basically means you too. So you, as in Marshall, had to pick a side. There couldn't be a situation where he could be in between, where he doesn't kill D-Mac and also sides with CBI. You either kill D-Mac and you're fully CBI, or you side with D-Mac, someone who you basically said was your brother, someone who you basically said you love. There is no in between when it comes to this war. Like Tommy once told Tariq, you can't have one foot in or one foot out. That basically doesn't work. But once he was, the fact that D-Mac was so emotional over JP's death, anybody that got in his way, he was definitely on demon time. He wanted all the smoke, and that's exactly what Marshall got. Again, the blood on the fridge, we saw the pictures of D-Mac and Marshall, it was very symbolic, but as they say, you ain't a real killer till you kill someone you love. And that's exactly what D-Mac is. He's a real killer. Now, can you find reasons for why D-Mac was wrong in this instance? Maybe, but what I do think it comes down to is, Marshall should have realized the moment it was exposed in episode 7 that they tried to have D-Mac killed with the 9/7s, that also put his life in danger, and the CBI were the wrong crew for him to be in. He should have sided with D-Mac and Uncle Tommy after episode 7. Now, with Tommy's reaction to D-Mac killing Marshall, as soon as he walked into the insane Prince's place of business, again, full of raw emotion, not just because of JP's death, but because he also just killed Marshall, and Tommy kind of just looked at him like, wait, you just killed Marshall? Tommy definitely was a little shocked, but in that moment they were dealing with so much, they basically said they'll deal with it later. And I do think they will talk about D-Mac killing Marshall a bit later on. I do think once the dust settles and everything clears, I think that conversation will definitely be had with Tommy around how he's killed a loved one. Tommy's going to be there mentoring and guiding D-Mac, not just when it comes to teaching him how to move in the streets, but also how to cope with situations basically like this. Because make no mistake, it will play on D-Mac's mind, even though he is a killer. He's just killed someone that he loves, someone that he's known since he was 6. He's lost 2 people in JP and Marshall in a very short amount of time, which in his mind he hasn't even been able to process. But once the dust settles, I do think he'll realize what he's done and what he's lost, and we'll hear that conversation with Tommy. Maybe not in episode 10 because there's going to be so much going on, they need to deal with a lot of characters, storylines and plot points, but maybe in Legacy if D-Mac is in Power Legacy, which I do hope he is. Over the past week or so prior to episode 9, we went through Janard and D-Mac's storyline in that particular breakdown where we spoke about Marshall's death. I actually thought Janard would be the one to kill Marshall. I don't think anybody thought D-Mac would do it himself, but we mentioned once Marshall does go, it does leave the gap open for someone else to fill, in terms of this partnership and this brotherhood. I also mentioned how Gianni has been very vocal about him not coming back to power. These are a couple of latest comments that he's been making across social media. So if you now have 2 characters who have that missing brotherhood in their story arcs, D-Mac no longer has Marshall and Tariq no longer has Brayden because Gianni isn't interested in coming back to power, well, what does it kind of look like they might be setting up going forward when it comes to the future of the world of power? Power Legacy, a potential new partnership and brotherhood forming with D-Mac and Tariq under Uncle Tommy, because we know the next chapter will also be Tommy's last. Whether it happens in Power Legacy or in the Power movies that may or may not come after, I do think the next chapter will be Tommy's last. So they do need to also set the foundation for what comes after Tommy, which I personally think is the partnership between Tariq and D-Mac, because of this connection that they have with Tommy, because both of them are Tommy's nephews, because both of them are still young, they have a lot in common, but also very different at the same time. D-Mac's been through a lot at his young age, he's been shot twice now, which is something Tariq hasn't been through. D-Mac has grown up in the streets, he's strategic, but still very raw and reckless as well. Same could be said about Tariq, even though he is now the so-called kingpin of New York under Chinadu, which in my opinion still does kind of feel forced. I don't think the writing particularly did Tariq's character justice in Power Book 2 Ghost, but that's something I'm sure Gary Lennon will get a hold of in Power Legacy and correct going forward. For example, making these characters more human, making Tariq more human. They can be hurt and got at, just like we've seen Gary Lennon do with both Tommy and D-Mac. So I am looking forward to what happens in the future when it comes to D-Mac, Tommy and Tariq. Hopefully he is in Power Legacy, but let's wait and see. Now, in terms of Janard, we went through it earlier in the week. I do think D-Mac owes him a bullet for more reasons than one. Setting him up with the 9/7s, shooting him in Season 1, and now also in Season 3, killing his father in JP, setting up Marshall to kill him as well. No doubt D-Mac does owe Janard a bullet, no ifs or buts, but I kind of do have this weird feeling for some reason where I wouldn't even be surprised if Janard did survive. I raised the topic in my breakdown earlier this week, could Janard actually survive? I'm only saying it because Chris Lofton is such a great actor. He's one of the best that we've had for a while in the world of Power. He truly is great at what he does. He does play the villain role really well, and it really would be a shame to lose that. Maybe that's where the survival thoughts come from, because he's such a great actor and provides a lot of entertainment in Power. But well and truly, we all know he does deserve a bullet, and he simply has to go for what he's done. And I still would lean more towards D-Mac killing Janard in episode 10. But that's a wrap on D-Mac and Marshall and what I hope we see next in the world of Power. So the floor is now yours. Did Marshall deserve to die, or did D-Mac take it too far? And can you see this team of D-Mac and Tariq working under Tommy going forward? Drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.